Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. Just at Tottenham's training ground. The pitch I would do this video normally on is being used, so I'm just going to do this in my car. So I've just done Ange Postecoglou's press conference ahead of the Man Utd League Cup quarter-final, which is obviously a massive game for Spurs in their search for a trophy to try and end that 17-year wait, or what will be 17 years if they do go and win it. And obviously it would be a huge moment for Ange Postecoglou in his tenure here, albeit, as he reiterated, it is only the quarter-final at this point, not the final. So they've got quite a lot of work to do, and obviously a very difficult team in a rejuvenated Manchester United team under Ruben and Amorim, who've obviously gone and won the Manchester derby at the weekend. So quite an obstacle to get through first, but quite a lot of points to get into ahead of this match from the press conference, from the open section of the press conference. And I think the place I'd like to start is regarding a subject that we didn't really ask him about after the Southampton game. Just didn't really feel like Ange after a match might have opened up as much as he did today on this particular subject, and it was the chants towards owner Daniel Levy, or Chairman Daniel Levy, during the game, which were pretty relentless. I referenced them in the video I did after the game. They started before the game, just before kickoff. They were reiterated by the away fans there after that early goal pretty soon to sort of almost make a point, and were pretty consistent throughout the match. There was also chanting pro for Ange Postecoglou, which was nice to see after that, obviously that confrontation he had at the end of the Bournemouth game. But he was asked about those chants, and he was asked also in the embargo section, which I may, by myself, which may come on, so I might do another video on that later, and a few of the comments he made, maybe, we'll see. But regarding the open section, he was asked about them, how he felt, and as I presumed he would say, he stuck to his line of how he feels the fans are free to express themselves in any way they want. It's something he's consistently said throughout his tenure, whether it be about the ownership, about him, about his players, whatever he feels. But he sort of turned it a little bit into wanting a really special atmosphere for the game against Man United, a la Galatasaray, Rangers at Ibrox, the atmospheres those teams produced, which Spurs arguably sort of struggled under, particularly in Galatasaray. I mean, like I say, it was such a noisy atmosphere that, you know, my hearing afterwards really took a while to come back to normal. It was a special atmosphere the Galatasaray fans put on, and he's hoping for something similar to the Man City game in the I guess it's the last rounds, which helped Spurs get over the line in that one. He feels like that can be something that they can generate again, the supporters at home to Man United, in what was a massive game for the club, and that's what he's hoping for. So that was quite interesting. I mean, like I said, he went on a bit more about, he was only asked sort of one question in the open section about those particular chants to Levy. It was more in the embargo section where he opened up a little bit more about them, which if I have time, I'll do a video on that. He reiterated another consistent message he's had throughout his time here about how he doesn't really feel like a one-off trophy is going to be the difference in turning this club into perennial competitors for major honours, which is where he wants to take them. It doesn't feel like the sort of answer to sustainable success in his mind, but it would obviously help along the way, and that is obviously what he's going for, albeit, as I said, he is only a quarter-final, not a final, and it could be a big step along the way. Talking about Amorim, he's been impressed. He's made a very quick impact. He's obviously tweaked the formation. You know, he's someone that he knew a lot about, I suppose, because he's one of the most highly, or has been one of the most highly rated coaches in Europe for some time. So I imagine all managers have been pretty fascinated by his journey, which has, you know, affected Tottenham in a way that Pedro Porro specifically was a big part of his team for a while, and obviously they signed him from Lisbon, and obviously Spurs played Lisbon a couple of times in the Champions League a few years ago, so well aware of Ruben Amorim and what he brings to the team. On that, he was also asked about Marcus Rashford. It's the big news story in England, dominating all the newspapers this morning off the back of Henry Winter's interview with Marcus Rashford, where he effectively said he was after a new challenge and essentially opened the door to leaving the club, having been left out of the squad against City at the weekend, and it seemingly looking like his future might be sort of up at Old Trafford. Rashford's a player that's been linked to Spurs a few times before, so it was fair for one of the reporters to ask Ange about that. He's probably unlikely to open up too much on potential transfer targets, knowing what Ange is like, but it was a sort of valid question. but he batted it away. Said he wasn't interested in any talk about Rashford at all. He said he called him a very good player. But he said he wasn't on his radar when pushed sort of further, but he said he'd pretty much give the same response about any player in the Premier League that wasn't one of his. So I don't think we can read too much into it. I mean, looking at it logically, Rashford's on absolutely massive wages that Tottenham don't generally pay. And he's also, in a situation where he'd still cost not the world, but for a player of, I suppose, his calibre when he's playing well. But given the trajectory he's been on, it just feels like quite an un-Tottenham kind of signing, albeit a good Rashford would fit into the system quite nicely, to be fair, on the left side. So we'll wait to see, but I wouldn't be holding my breath on that particular transfer just based on it logically. I haven't really heard any more specifics about it. Maybe try and look into see if there's any particular interest from Tottenham, albeit, you would have guessed it'd probably be more like a loan move, which would United even be open to that. And I'm just completely sort of hypothesising here right now rather than basing on any intel. Talking about sort of individuals from the game the other night, Lucas Bergvall, he was full of praise for. He said his performance effectively is given another option in that number 6 role. And Bergvall's someone that I wouldn't say highly critical of. It's just when he signed, because he's obviously only 18, so what can you expect? But he came in with quite a lot of fanfare. A lot of supporters getting very excited about him. Remember when I did that interview with Pape Sarr back in, I think it was August, and I asked him which of the new signings had impressed you most. He said Bergvall, and basically tipped him to be a world-class player. I'm slightly paraphrasing, but not far off. So you went into these games, thinking, okay, he's very young, but he's been talked about in such a way that you've been very, very excited about him. And I wouldn't say his performances generally have blown me away so far, but he's gradually in recent weeks off the bench at Rangers, I think it was, and against Southampton, starting to show signs of adaptation to a new league, new country, and starting to stuff a little bit more. I remember in the Galatasaray game in particular, when he played in that match, one of their goals came from him holding onto the ball too long, and it felt like at times, because he's obviously a really technically gifted player, there were moments where he was holding on the ball a little bit too long, which doesn't surprise me, because I remember when he signed, I was looking at his sort of profile. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Jude Bellingham in the way he sort of drove the ball forward, but Bellingham, obviously such a world-class talent, there are times for England where to be honest, it's not like he holds the ball on for too long. Often he'll take England out of danger and set a new attack along the way with his close control and his power and his ability to keep players off the ball. But he does generally hold on to the ball a bit longer than your average player. And that sort of bore a similarity when I watched some clips of Bergvall. But maybe in recent weeks it's been a little bit less of that. He's fitting a bit more into the system. So yeah, he said, and that's kind of correlates with some of Ange's comments about his performance against Southampton. He said he obviously did fantastically well, but he called it a mature display, and maybe that is what could be part of why he saw it as a mature performance. Less holding onto the ball, maybe using it in a bit more economical way that could help the team, and that's really, really encouraging. Whether he plays against United, we'll have to see. But exciting that he feels like an extra option now for Ange, which I think I said after the game that when Spence and Bergwijn play like that, albeit against the worst team in the league, so they're going to have to do it more consistently and against higher opposition to really feel like an option that you can rely on right now. But if they can do that, then suddenly the squad looks a lot deeper than it previously did. And on that note, he basically had some nice words to say about Archie Gray and Djed Spence as well. Archie Gray is someone I didn't really focus too much on after the Southampton game, but a lot of fans were singling him out for praise, and yeah, I was probably right. I was probably wrong to overlook him to a certain extent. Probably just wanted to get back from Southampton at that point, but he was very good. Playing out of position, done very, very well there, and obviously kept a clean sheet with Dragusin, which is really encouraging. Albeit against a Southampton team who looked mentally shot, and obviously Russell Martin was sacked pretty shortly after the game, which I'll come on to in 1 second. Actually, just before we get to his thoughts on Russell Martin being sacked along with Gary O'Neill. Just a quick word about Yang Min-hyuk, who's over here at Tottenham now. Obviously, this South Korean wonder kid they signed in the summer, but was staying till the end of the season with his team back in South Korea, having had a fantastic season in the South Korean top division, where he won Young Player of the Year. I think he scored 12 goals. I'm probably going to do a video on him soon. Actually, I've done a piece on on him, which I don't think it's gone out yet, but I'll do a video to go with it. But he's over here now. He can't actually be registered till January, which also means that he can't even train with the team at the moment. But he's over. Ange talked about how he's been having a good look around. He's been taking English lessons, getting a feel for the club, which all sort of is about integration into this new environment he's got, which sounds like a good idea, which is Ange himself talked about how when he was at Celtic and he signed players from the Asian market, he did something similar in the sort of December leading up to the January transfers, of them being able to actually sign for the club and start training with the club, and how it helped them. So a nice transition, I suppose, from Yang's perspective into the club over the last couple of days. Yeah, just finally onto, before we get to injuries and sort of team selection, just some of these comments he made about Gary O'Neill and Russell Martin sacking, which were really passionate and quite funny, I suppose, at times. Just his initial quip about Martin sacking, not in a sort of, obviously he really feels for Russell, but he just sort of said, they might have to change the chant of getting sacked in the morning, because obviously he was sacked in the night, in the evening, like barely an hour after the match. As I was starting to drive back from Southampton, the news came through that Russell Martin had been given the sack. So he just sort of talked about how he obviously felt for those guys in particular. He sort of backed them to come back, but his point was that he just finds it crazy, the lack of time that managers are given. I know we've heard this like many times before, and it's always the managers will be the first to say it, part of their sort of managerial fraternity, I suppose, to support one another. But he does have a point. It does seem like it's getting shorter and shorter at times, and his point was he felt like the notion that clubs want managers to come in and build something doesn't exist, and he was very strong on that, just feeling like it was almost like a misnomer to believe that managers could come in and create something, because they're just not given the chance. Because as soon as one sign of difficulty, then they often get sacked, and that's the way it goes. I think a couple of things on that point. Firstly, it's interesting because and this is something I picked him up on in the embargo section, which maybe I'll talk about a bit later, but if I do another video. But it obviously conflicts with his whole rhetoric about his whole role, where he talks, it's all about building something for the future and something sustainable, and if anything, overlooking sort of short-term gains for longer-term success. So how that stacks up with how he feels about football generally, and particularly other clubs like Wolves and Southampton doing what they've done with their managers, is interesting, because it kind of contradicts what he's trying to achieve. But that was something I did ask him about, and maybe I'll do something on that. Personally, I feel like Russell Martin, obviously they won the promotion, and that was a fantastic achievement, and maybe there are short memories from that point of view. But there is part of me that there's a bit of a new wave of managers who, like Russell Martin, like Vincent Kompany, where they're trying to adopt a philosophy that just feels like it. Personally, I just don't feel like it will be successful to prevent relegation. And it's all well and good saying, long term, maybe they'll change the club long enough that it will get them back up. But when you're dealing, it's a bit different with Spurs. The place they are in the league. Yes, there's the pressure, extra pressure from the fans to win trophies and be successful. But when you're talking about getting relegated and staying in the league, you're talking more about people's jobs and the amount of money that will go out the club from relegation. And if you're going down a route that feels so impractical, bear in mind you have 5 points from 16 games, and not realistic to staying up. I don't know. I'm not as convinced that should be a sort of championed in the way that I suppose Ange has been, albeit again he's part of the managerial fraternity. I mean, Kompany might be managing Bayern Munich now, and he might be doing really, really well. But what about Burnley? I mean, maybe they'll go back up this season. But Southampton, it might be all well and good Russell Martin sort of having being in a position where he plays such entertaining football on every so often against good teams that he might get a better job off the back of it. But Southampton will likely get relegated, so I do think they're within their rights to make a decision. That doesn't really speak to the sort of bad decisions that the club, Southampton, have made in recent years under the current ownership. That's a different sort of conversation and one I won't get into now because this is a Tottenham video, but it's just something that slightly bothers me. And as someone that covered Bournemouth in their first, when they got promoted to the Premier League back in 2014, 2015, I used to cover the Football League at that point. It always struck me that Bournemouth played teams off the park during that season. They played really, really attacking football. Then as soon as they got promoted to the Premier League, Eddie Howe realised that style was never going to work to be successful in the Premier League. So he changed completely to a counter-attacking style. And they stayed up for 5 years and did really, really well. Yes, eventually got relegated, but that's so far in the future that for me, that's not really relevant to what they ended up doing. And I do think sometimes the focus is a bit more, it can be a little bit too much on the manager's own sort of aspirations versus what the club might want to achieve. But anyway, that's just a personal thing on that front. But it was just very interesting to hear Ange talk about it. So finally on injuries, Destiny Udogie, turns out he actually isn't injured when he came off. He said it was more soreness, but he's not ruling him out at this stage of playing against United. He was a bit more specific about timelines regarding other injured players. So Van der Ven and Romero, he says the new year, not quite sure when yet, I think he said something about Van der Ven, it not being as bad as the initial injury he had, but obviously they're going to be careful with him. Mikey Moore is now training after this virus that's kept him out for quite a long way away, and he's not far away, according to Ange, and he says he and Ben Davies are sort of the next cabs off the rank to getting back into the team, saying Ben Davies maybe next week, which will be a welcome boost at the back for them. And then Richarlison maybe the first week of the new year. So I guess that was kind of similar to the time frame we maybe expected with Richarlison based on what he said before, but the specifics of the first week of the new year sort of bode well, I guess, going into that, going against Tamworth perhaps, or Newcastle, maybe on the 4th. So we'll see, which would be a welcome extra option in the attacking areas, because whatever you think about Richarlison and his injury proneness might be frustrating, but when he's played for Ange's team, he's looked a threat and will definitely add to their attacking options. So yeah, just finally, this Man United game feels absolutely massive in the context of the season, as every game seems to be, but particularly this one, and with Liverpool on the weekend as well. Obviously, a sort of good feeling seems to be back a bit after that excellent win at Southampton, but this competition feels like a really winnable one. They've been handed a home tie. They saw against City, obviously going through a terrible time, but that was the first defeat of City during this terrible run, so it's not quite fair to look back on that one as City were just terrible. That was a different moment, and that was a huge win back then. United come in, they've got a new manager, they do have exciting players, but they're still going through a transitional period themselves. It is an eminently winnable game for Spurs, which will put them into a great position. And I do think personally that winning a trophy for Spurs could be a game changer, just because of the pressure of not winning one for so long. Just seems to have got to this set of supporters, understandably so, more than many others, if any others, and maybe that would be the turning point for them if they can go and do that, and would be a huge role in giving Ange the time to achieve what he wants to achieve, which is obviously turning them into regular competitors for top honours, a bit like with Arteta and the FA Cup all those years ago for Arsenal. But yeah, I mean, looking at the team, I wouldn't have thought there'd be loads of differences to the Southampton team. Probably a doggy you'd guess at this point maybe doesn't play, and Spence plays left back with Porro at right back, but we'll have to wait and see. In defence, obviously I don't think there are really any other options at the moment, so it'll be Gray and Dragusin, obviously Forster. I mean, probably Basuma comes back in. Bentancur obviously is suspended, and obviously suspended for the Liverpool game as well, because his appeal against his ban was rejected, so he's out for the next 2 games still. But an interesting bit of I'm not sure about dilemma, but a selection choice that Ange has to make over how well Bergvall played. You'd think Basuma will probably come back in for this particular game. And then does he stick with the 3 that played pretty well against Southampton up front? I mean, Sonny came off at half-time, so he should be pretty refreshed for this game and played really well. So you'd think he would start. And then you obviously play Kulusevski, it's just which side, unless you're thinking about trying to keep the team fresh for Liverpool, but that seems that would, in my mind, be an error, given how the significance of this particular match. So I wouldn't be surprised if he stuck with Johnson off the bench rather than bringing him to the team for this one, and he stuck with the similar midfield of Sarr, Maddison, and then Basuma coming back in instead of Bergvall. So we'll wait to see. A massive game again for Tottenham, and one that if the fans whose frustrations towards the ownership isn't going to go away anytime soon, but if they can focus, particularly for this game, on providing a kind of similar atmosphere as the one I experienced in Istanbul or Ibrox, then that could go a long way to carrying their team over the line, because they've got the talent in the team to do it, and it would go a long way to really kick-starting this season and showing what could be possible under Ange Postecoglou in his second season.